Is Pope Leo XIV breaking with Pope Francis? There's a subtle cue that he might just be doing that with regard to one of Francis's most controversial documents. Also, is Pride Month on the decline? Hopeful signs that might be the case. This and more in today's Forward Boldly. Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. First of all, happy month of the Sacred Heart. June is the month of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It is not Pride Month. It's not Love is Love Month. It is the month of humility, the humility embodied and exemplified in the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That love poured out to humankind through his most sacred heart. So if you have a Sacred Heart image, hang it up in your home. Better yet, if you have a Sacred Heart banner or flag, hang it out in your yard. Let the world know that you honor our Lord this month of June. And consider making acts of reparation to the Sacred Heart for all the offenses, and there are many, many offenses committed against him specifically, especially in this month. What did he tell St. Margaret Mary Alacoque when he appeared to her with his heart burning on fire with love? He said, "Behold the heart which has so loved men that it has spared nothing, even to exhausting and consuming itself in order to testify to its love. And in return, I receive from the greater part only ingratitude by their irreverence and sacrilege and by the coldness and contempt they have for me in the sacrament of love." Our Lord's heart is burning with love for us. It's on fire with an all-consuming love for us. And most of the world doesn't know, most of the world doesn't understand. And a lot don't even care. So, make reparation. Love him back. Go spend time in adoration, in prayer. If you don't have an adoration chapel, then sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Love Christ. Go to Mass as often as possible. Love him in the way you treat your spouse, and the way you treat your children, your family, friends, neighbors, in the way you treat strangers, including the rude strangers. Love him through showing acts of kindness, patience, humility, meekness. And you know that you can demonstrate that too on social media. In fact, social media is the perfect opportunity to make reparation to the heart of Jesus. Because as you know, on social media, especially these anonymous accounts, people can be really rude. You know, they can say things that they would never dare say to you in person. They'll just say whatever they want. Extremely rude. And these are perfect opportunities for you to practice the meekness and humility of Christ, for you not to lash back with the same rudeness or meanness, in some cases cruelty, but instead to be meek and humble of heart, and even better, pray. Pray for these individuals. That is the path on which sanctity lies, as the saints have taught us. When people injure us, a small injury, a grave injury, if we can offer up that injury, not just for souls in general, but for the one who injured us, that is the path to sanctity. And you see that over and over and over again in the lives of the saints. This is what they did. They suffered humiliations and injuries and harms from other people. And what would they do? They would pray. They would offer up that humiliation, that suffering, that harm, for the sake of the one who caused them harm. Perfect example of this, and I've done a show on her before, is St. Maria Goretti. She was killed. She was killed by who is now a blessed, Alessandro Serenelli. Incredible story. Go listen to that if you haven't, because it's incredible. It's not just the life of St. Maria Goretti. Everybody knows about that. Do you know about what happened to Blessed Alessandro Serenelli? Do you know how St. Maria Goretti's mother responded? She is a saint. Even though she's not officially canonized, she is a saint in heaven, I am convinced, because of the way that she embraced the murderer of her daughter. But I've already done shows on that. Incredible story. But St. Maria Goretti offered up her terrible sufferings from all the knife wounds inflicted on her by her murderer For his salvation, she offered it up as she was dying. She dies. And what happens? All the suffering she offered up for him, obtained for him the grace of conversion, and now sainthood. He's a blessed in heaven. He actually answers prayers from heaven. Absolutely amazing. That is what the Sacred Heart of Jesus can accomplish in the hearts of those willing to embrace him, love him truly, and follow his example of loving those who have harmed you. And that is what the month of June, the Sacred Heart, really embodies, that incredible supernatural love. Now, turning to our main topic, something very interesting that I noticed yesterday, Sunday, that anyone would have missed if they just blinked their eyes. It was subtle. It was so subtle that, like I said, if you blinked your eyes, you would have missed it. It was subtle, but significant, I believe. So on June 1st, when the world is celebrating Gay Pride Month, Pope Leo devoted his homily during Sunday Mass, which was spoken on the Jubilee for families, children, grandparents, and the elderly. He devoted his homily to marriage between a man and a woman, because there is no other marriage other than between a man and a woman. So that is the first thing that on the very first of the month of June, that is what he devoted his homily to. But even more significant in that homily, I think, is what appears to be a slight break with Pope Francis, specifically with the apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia. How so? Now, it comes down to a single phrase in Leo's Sunday homily. Quote, "Marriage is not an ideal, but the canon of true love between a man and a woman. Total, faithful, fruitful love." Marriage is not an ideal, but the canon, meaning the standard, the criterion of true love between a man and a woman. Total, faithful, fruitful love. In other words, marriage is not some pie in the sky, lofty ideal that some of us can only hope to grasp, but is very difficult to attain. Rather, Pope Leo is saying marriage is the standard. It's the standard of true love between a man and a woman. I don't know if many of you know this, but this concept of marriage as being an ideal was actually debated during the Synod discussions that led up to Amoris Laetitia, as well as afterwards. So this line by Pope Leo is not insignificant. It means something in the context of all that debate. And he was fully aware, I am sure, of that debate. But we're going to come back to this in just a little bit. Now, to be clear, of course, Pope Leo has praised Pope Francis many times. He's cited his works. He's quoted him. And that is to be expected with popes. They will never trash their predecessor, no matter what they personally think of their predecessor. Truly, popes, out of respect and reverence, will simply never criticize their predecessor, not publicly. They will praise their predecessor. So you saw Pope St. John Paul II praising Pope John Paul I. Of course, he was only on the throne for 33 days. Benedict praised John Paul II. Francis praised Benedict. And of course, Leo praises Francis. Absolutely normal and to be expected. But like I said, pay attention to what Leo said in his Sunday homily, as he is reaffirming the goodness of marriage between a man and a woman, saying that, quote, "Today's world needs the marriage covenant in order to know and accept God's love and to defeat, thanks to its unifying and reconciling power, the forces that break down relationships and societies." The forces that break down relationships and societies. What are those forces? Well, the forces that are in favor of non-marriage. Forces in favor of breaking apart true marriage and the family. And he makes clear, and he's always made clear for years, as cardinal, as bishop, as priest, that true marriage is only between a man and a woman. But this particular, that's a finger in the eye to the message of Pride Month, which claims, of course, that marriage can be between two people of the same sex. It cannot. That's not true marriage. But here really is the significant bit. So Amoris Laetitia, of course, is the post-synodal apostolic exhortation that was released in 2016 after the Synod. It was the one that caused so much controversy. Now, there were other exhortations that caused controversy, but this one caused major controversy in 2016 because of that controversial little footnote 351, making it appear to open the door to Holy Communion for divorced and remarried couples who are objectively living in the state of adultery. That was the exhortation that inspired 4 cardinals to submit their dubia to Pope Francis. Remember the dubia, which Pope Francis basically ignored? You had Cardinals Carlo Caffarra, Raymond Burke, Walter Brandmuller, Joachim Meisner. Those were the 4 cardinals. Now, 2 of them have since gone on to their reward, Caffarra and Meisner. But this is what that controversial footnote 351 said. Essentially that in certain cases of divorced and remarried, this can include the help of the sacraments, meaning confession and Eucharist. Why? Because he specifically mentions confession and the Holy Eucharist in footnote 351. So much controversy and confusion ensued because of that little footnote, with even bishops and cardinals confused. It wasn't just laity. Bishops and cardinals were confused. They didn't quite know how to implement Amoris Laetitia in their dioceses. And please note that you never heard a single word about Bishop Prevost implementing Amoris Laetitia in his diocese. But there were some that were very loud about it, very much, we have to start giving communion. Now, we have to start being more open to giving communion to those in irregular unions. But because of all this confusion, even among our highest ranked clergy, the cardinals felt that they had to submit these dubia, these questions, to Pope Francis that could easily be answered by a simple yes or no. Because what Amoris Laetitia said seemed to contradict what Pope St. John Paul II had already set forth in Familiaris Consortio, specifically section 84, which laid down 3 conditions for the admittance to Holy Communion of those living in a, quote, remarriage. So these were the 3 conditions. The persons concerned could not separate without committing new injustices. For instance, let's say they've got young children and they're both responsible for taking care of the upbringing of their children, so they simply cannot just divorce and separate because that would cause greater injustices. Second condition is they take upon themselves, and this is very key, they take upon themselves the commitment to live according to the truth of their situation. That is, to cease living together as if they were husband and wife, basically abstaining from sex. That's what that means. No sex, because this is an objectively adulterous union. It's not marriage. Third condition, they avoid giving scandal, meaning they avoid giving the appearance of sin so as to avoid the danger of leading others into sin. Because even though you might privately be leading a life, abstaining from sex, if you're giving the impression to the public and everybody else that you're not, that can lead to scandal. That could lead to, further sin. So those are the 3 conditions. And the defenders of Amoris Laetitia, and I think Amoris Laetitia itself lays this out in kind of a nuanced way, which did require further clarity, quite frankly, it did, which is why the cardinal submitted the dubia. But Amoris Laetitia basically says that we need to take a pastoral approach to divorce and remarriage. Now, some may differ. Some may think this is actually not pastoral. It's very harmful. But Amoris Laetitia believes it's laying out a more pastoral approach to those who are in divorced and remarried relationships. So that means that in some cases, there might be mitigating circumstances that decrease the culpability of a person living in an objectively sinful union. So what does that mean? So remember, for mortal sin to be mortal, there has to be not only grave matter, meaning the objectively sinful act, but there has to be full knowledge and deliberate consent. You have to have full knowledge and deliberate consent. So if you have all those, then it's a mortal sin. But if you have the objectively sinful act without full knowledge, without consent, then while the matter itself remains grave, it isn't necessarily mortally sinful. So Amoris Laetitia is basically saying that in some cases of divorce and remarriage, circumstances might exist where, of course, you have the objectively sinful act, meaning there's sex in an adulterous union, but the knowledge may be lacking, the consent, the full consent may be lacking, thus making it possible on a case-by-case basis with pastoral discernment that the person might be able to go to confession and might even receive Holy Communion. So I know, it's highly nuanced, and that's, quite frankly, it's not really the way most people took Amoris Laetitia, including some bishops. A lot of them took it as a just blanket permission to start opening up communion to anyone and everyone in objectively sinful relationships. But, canonist Dr. Ed Peters made a really important note at the time when Amoris Laetitia was released. He said, quote, Holy Communion is to be withheld from divorced and remarried Catholics in virtue of Canon 915, which does not require Catholic ministers to read the souls of would-be communicants, but rather directs ministers to withhold Holy Communion from those who, as an external and observable matter, obstinately persevere in manifest grave sin. That's Canon 915. Now remember, Pope Leo, this is an important point, Pope Leo is a canonist. He has a degree in canon law. And as Dr. Peters notes, canon law is clear on this point. You don't have to look into the souls of an individual. You don't have to go through this whole pastoral discernment process. If they're living in an objectively, manifestly sinful union, you are to deny them Holy Communion. And quite frankly, it was disappointing to me and many others that Pope Francis never bothered to respond directly to the four cardinals and their dubia, because they submitted them respectfully. If you haven't read them, go read them again. These cardinals sought clarity, and they were the model of respect in the way that they sought it. And the Vicar of Christ never gave them answers, at least not directly. Now, there was a response to the Czech Conference of Bishops in 2023 with regard to this question of whether we can give communion to the divorced and remarried. I mean, it only took them 7 years to answer. It only took 7 years after all the confusion and frustration caused by this ambiguity and highly nuanced position of Amoris Laetitia. 7 years. Why didn't the Vatican respond to the dubia immediately with the same exact response they gave the Czech bishops, which was a reaffirmation that divorced and remarried cannot receive communion unless they pledge to lead lives of chastity? But that Pope Francis recognizes that in some cases there may be difficulties in living that out. So it may call for some pastoral discernment. But back to this notion of marriage being an ideal. In 2018, Cardinal Burke gave an interview to Catholic World Report, clearing up confusion caused by Amoris Laetitia. And he spoke about differing interpretations of Amoris Laetitia among clergy. But then he said this, now listen closely, quote, I suppose it was expressed in a way that may be helpful in understanding this problem of interpretation when, during the first session of the most recent Synod of Bishops on the Family, in which I took part, one prominent cardinal said that marriage is an ideal, but we cannot hold people to the ideal. The truth of the matter is marriage is not an ideal. It is a reality. It is a gift of divine grace to live in the love of the Holy Trinity, in a faithful, indissoluble, life-giving love, and therefore we are held, those who enter into marriage, those who confer the sacrament of marriage on each other, are held to live in fidelity to that grace, even to a heroic degree. Marriage is not an ideal. Father Gerald Murray, the New York priest who frequently offers papal commentary with Raymond Arroyo, also explicitly rejected the concept of marriage as an ideal. In a 2018 article in The Catholic Thing, he opened his article with this: the Church has always taught that marriage is intrinsically indissoluble by the express will of God. That the unbreakable unity of marriage is not an ideal in the sense of an as yet unattained goal towards which married couples strive, but rather is the very reality, the very nature of marriage. The Church teaches that fidelity to marriage vows is not merely something that you should strive for in seeking to arrive at the ideal of marriage, but rather is a serious obligation inherent in the nature of marriage. Going on to say, ever since the publication of Amoris Laetitia, doubts have been cast upon the necessity of adhering to this understanding of marriage. And he was actually criticizing Cardinal Blaise Supich, who was referring to marriage as an ideal, saying the voice of conscience could very well affirm the necessity of living at some distance from the Church's understanding of the ideal, while nevertheless calling a person to new stages of growth and to new decisions which can enable the ideal to be more fully realized. And here comes the apparent break between Leo and Francis. Amoris Laetitia refers to marriage as an ideal repeatedly. In fact, the word ideal is mentioned 22 times in Amoris Laetitia. And most of those times are in reference to marriage as an ideal, as the lofty ideal. It's way up there, held up by the Church as what we ought to strive after. But, and here's the point of Amoris Laetitia, not everyone lives up to that ideal. Many people don't. So how do we minister to those unions that don't live up to this lofty ideal of marriage? This is just an example. Amoris Laetitia says, yet conscience can do more than recognize that a given situation does not correspond objectively to the overall demands of the gospel. It can also recognize with sincerity and honesty what for now is the most generous response which can be given to God, and come to see with a certain moral security that it is what God himself is asking amid the concrete complexity of one's limits, while yet not fully the objective ideal. So do you see what they're trying to say here? They're trying to say that these people living in irregular unions, whatever those unions might be, divorce, remarriage, cohabitation, same-sex unions, whatever, it's the best that a person can give in that moment, and maybe that's all that God is asking from them in that moment. It's not the ideal marriage between a man and a woman, but it's the most generous offer that they can give at the moment, and maybe that's what God is asking of them in that moment. It's kind of controversial. Elsewhere in Amoris Laetitia, quote, without detracting from the evangelical ideal, there's a need to accompany with mercy and patience the eventual stages of personal growth as these progressively appear. Now, lots of other examples of using the word ideal in reference to marriage. And like I mentioned, Amoris Laetitia is all about a more pastoral approach to those in objectively sinful unions. Now, nothing wrong in and of itself with being pastoral, of course. I mean, all priests, all clergy should be pastoral. But here's the problem, I think. There are a lot of divorced and remarried couples who are not even aware that they're living in sin. Not even aware of it. Or if they are aware, they don't know that they're not supposed to be receiving Holy Communion. So maybe these couples are, divorced, remarried. They know it's not what the Church allows, but they march up and receive Holy Communion because they're not aware that they're not supposed to. How long is your confession line compared to the communion line? Do a comparison. How long? Usually, handful of people in confession, if any at all. Whole army marching up to receive communion. Many Catholics living in objectively sinful unions are poorly catechized. They have not been taught that this is wrong. Or, if they do know it's wrong, they're unaware that they actually can't receive Holy Communion in the state of mortal sin. That's a very clear teaching of the Church. You cannot receive Holy Communion in the state of mortal sin. You have to be in good standing in the Church. Scripture makes it clear that when you eat and drink unworthily, you bring judgment upon yourself. You bring damnation upon yourself. You are not allowed. Now, here are some comments that people didn't really report on, not too much. I mean, people sort of didn't realize that Pope Francis actually did seem to clarify this point in 2016. Before he actually issued Amoris Laetitia, he was on the papal airplane to Rome. And in response to a question by media, he said that Holy Communion is the last step in full integration into the Church by the divorced and remarried, but it's not necessary. This is what he said, quote, I know married Catholics in a second union who go to church once or twice a year and say, I want communion. as if joining in communion were an award. It's a work towards integration. All doors are open, but we cannot say from here on they can have communion. This would be an injury also to marriage, to the couple, because it wouldn't allow them to proceed on this path of integration. So he seems pretty clear there. Question is, why weren't you that clear in Amoris Laetitia? Why? In any case, returning to my point, Pope Leo explicitly contradicted Amoris Laetitia in his Sunday homily when he said, quote, marriage is not an ideal, but the canon of true love between a man and a woman, total, faithful, fruitful love. Like I said, he directly contradicts Amoris Laetitia in what it says, referring to marriage numerous times as an ideal. It's in the official Italian translation with the word ideal. It's in the official English translation. Pope Leo says marriage is in fact not an ideal, but the canon, the standard, the principle, the criterion of true love between a man and a woman. Then he goes on to describe married love as total, faithful, and fruitful. And that's actually a citation to Pope Paul VI's Humanae Vitae. So even though Amoris Laetitia refers to marriage numerous times, certainly something Pope Leo could have cited in this homily on marriage and family, he chose to cite instead Humanae Vitae. Dr. Jeffrey Myris of Catholic Culture commented on the notion of marriage as an ideal back in 2016. He wrote, quote, but the Pope must also know from the controversies of the 70s and 80s that an emphasis on the ideal can often be taken to mean not that one understanding of marriage is right and others are wrong, or that one understanding of marriage is good and others are bad, but that one understanding of marriage is ideal, yet others are also acceptable and good. Myris goes on to clarify that that's not the argument contained in Amoris Laetitia, but its language certainly could lend to confusion, and it did lend to confusion. So I'm not stating this as a definite break between Pope Leo and Francis, and to temper expectations just a little bit. Leo did quote Amoris Laetitia in his Monday message to the Dicastery of Laity, Family, and Life, but this was the section that he actually quoted. Quote, it is true that families today have many problems, but, quote, the gospel of the family also nourishes seeds that are still waiting to grow and serves as the basis for caring for those plants that are wilting and must not be neglected. So there's nothing particularly controversial in that phrase from Amoris Laetitia, just restating basic church teaching. But like I said, I found this tidbit interesting. I believe it's significant, especially in the context of the debate swirling at the time as well as in previous decades about marriage being an ideal versus a reality or a standard. Now, this might not be good enough for some of you, judging by some of the comments. It's not. Some of you want to see Pope Leo take a slash and burn approach to his predecessor and reverse this and rebuke that and burn this down and cut this off. But as I've said before, Pope Leo just doesn't strike me as that sort of person. From those who know him, they say he's thoughtful, he's quiet, he's a man of few words, he listens, he asks intelligent questions, he proceeds carefully and methodically. He's not a fly by the seat of your pants kind of man. Neither does he seem short-tempered or arbitrary. And from what many have said, he's humble, he's kind, he's not going to humiliate or embarrass people when implementing changes, including his predecessor. He's just not going to do that. Remember, he's a canonist. He's methodical, thoughtful. He knows the law. So what I think is that we can expect incremental changes, slow changes, little things here and there, but changes that signify, that are significant, that will show respect for his predecessor while charting his own path. And we already saw that. Saw him breaking with Francis and charting his own path from the very first moment he stepped out onto the loggia. He didn't choose the name Francis II. He didn't eschew the papal mozzetta and other traditional papal attire. And he's doing things in the liturgy that his predecessor never did. For instance, chanting the Regina Caeli. That's a weekly occurrence now. Now, I know Pope Francis said the Regina Caeli, but Leo is chanting it. He's also encouraging crowds to chant the Pater Noster. Absolutely beautiful. And recall when he held his first meeting with the cardinals just a couple of days after his election, this is how he began his address. He said this, let us pray together in Latin the Our Father and the Hail Mary. He led all the cardinals in praying the Our Father and the Hail Mary in Latin. And it's such that the Pontifical Institute of Sacred Music has rolled out a new series titled Let's Sing with the Pope. It's rolling out new videos every week, and they're wonderful. So in light of all this, some are saying he's laying the groundwork for something. Not sure what yet, but he's laying the groundwork for something. He's clearly wanting to expose the church, the laity, to the beauties of Latin chant. Another thing that I think is very interesting, the return of bowing to the pontiff. You can see it here. And this didn't happen, as far as I know, during the pontificate of Francis, because he didn't want that. He didn't want that. But here it is, returning under Pope Leo. Now, whether Pope Leo asked for its return or whether people just decided, you know what, we're going to do this, and Pope Leo is not objecting to it, but it is a return to the tradition. Something else that people have noticed, people can freely kiss the fisherman's ring. They can kneel and kiss the fisherman's ring as a sign of reverence for the sacred office of the Pope. As we know, Pope Francis did not like that. He would not allow people to kiss the papal ring. In fact, there is what I consider a pretty tragic video of him yanking his hand away from all these individuals, these Catholics, wishing to come up and show an act of reverence to the sacred office of the pontiff, and he's denying them that ability. Now, some people have said, oh, this is just funny. I didn't find it funny at all. I found it heartbreaking, and I found it humiliating for the people coming up, wishing to show an act of reverence. Utterly humiliating. I couldn't believe it when I saw this. It was just shocking. So it's a wonderful thing to see that Pope Leo understands that this is not a signification of his pride and his pomp as the vicar of Christ. It's a gesture of reverence towards the sacred office. It's a gesture of reverence, of honor. And it's something that people love to show him. And he's giving them that chance. In humility, he's giving them that chance. It's a wonderful thing to see. So again, another break from his predecessor. But isn't it ironic that while our Holy Father is reintroducing the beauty of Latin chant to his prayers and liturgies, encouraging the faithful to learn and to chant along, that the Bishop of Charlotte, North Carolina, is trying to get rid of all the Latin in the Mass. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about the leaked draft document by Bishop Martin, a draft that the Pillar reports is being shelved for now. But reading through it, my jaw was on the floor. It was on the floor repeatedly. I could not believe what I was reading. Because this wasn't about implementation of Traditionis Custodes. No, this goes much farther than that. Much, much, much farther. I mean, priests, I've been reading commentary from priests who are not trads at all, but they're reading through this and they're like, this is tyrannical. This goes just beyond anything that bishops would normally do. Because not only does it discourage Latin liturgy, which is, by the way, a direct contradiction of Vatican II's Sacrosanctum Concilium, it also discourages priests from wearing traditional vestments, or even praying prayers while vesting. And the draft actually orders women who veil during Mass, I veil during Mass, by the way, that they are forbidden from wearing veils if they are lectors or otherwise occupied on the altar during Mass. Forbids them. Can anyone say micromanagement? He even discourages people from praying the St. Michael prayer at the end of Mass. If you have watched my episodes, you know that I have strongly encouraged pastors to start praying the St. Michael prayer after Mass if they are not. This was a prayer composed by Pope Leo XIII after a terrifying vision he had between Satan and God. I spoke about this in a prior episode on Pope Leo. The St. Michael prayer is a powerful prayer of spiritual warfare because, as we know, St. Michael is the enemy of Lucifer. He's the one who cast Lucifer and a third of the angels out of the sky into hell. But here's Bishop Martin's reasoning for discouraging the St. Michael prayer. Quote, while the intention to defeat the power of Satan and other evil spirits is commendable, its recitation at the end of Mass can lead to the unfortunate doubt that the Eucharistic liturgy is somehow insufficient to bring about the scattering of evil and motivation to do good. In all my years of praying the St. Michael prayer after Mass, I have never once thought the Eucharistic liturgy was insufficient to scatter evil or motivate us to do good. Not once. In fact, I cannot even imagine anyone on earth coming away from Mass thinking that because they prayed the St. Michael prayer. I mean, honest to goodness, this is just absurd on the part of the bishop. And I don't say that lightly. I don't throw those things around. It is absurd. And with all due respect, I don't wish to add to the pylon because he is really in the spotlight these days, but this is just absurd reasoning. It makes no sense whatsoever. And because it makes no sense, I get the feeling he's just making it up, and he's just fundamentally hostile towards anything that smacks of tradition, and therefore he just wants to do away with it using whatever absurd reasons. And you know what else he does? In that leaked draft document, he dismissed the wearing of the fiddleback chasuble, which is the traditional, beautiful chasuble, calling them overly ornate vestments that put more focus on the ministers than the Eucharist. Wow, that's quite the judgment. Really, I encourage him to go visit the rectory of St. Jean Vianney in the French town of Ars. I made a pilgrimage there years ago. And the first thing you notice when you're walking through that rectory is just how poor it is. Incredibly poor, because St. Jean Vianney, who is the patron saint of all parish priests because of his profound holiness, he spent literally hours and hours and hours in the confessional every single day. He was called a wonder worker, and he could read hearts and souls. This is the model parish priest. He chose to live in complete and abject poverty. That's the first thing you'll notice when you're walking through that rectory in the little town of Ars. But what else stands out? There is a glass cabinet where his vestments are hanging on display. You can see them, and they're so beautiful. Beautiful French brocade, gold, absolutely beautiful. And it contrasts with the poverty of this little rectory. And, he slept on a straw mat on the floor to do penance for sinners. He had a bed. He slept on a straw mat on the hard stone floor in penance for sinners. But he wore the most beautiful, ornate vestments during Mass. Why? Was it because he was proud and wanted to show off and be the center of attention? Of course not. He specifically said it was because it was fitting to the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the liturgy, heaven on earth, where our Lord himself comes down. And the priest is an alter Christus, another Christ. It was fitting for the glory of what was happening in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And that is why he wore the most beautiful and ornate vestments. And I would like Bishop Michael Martin to go take a look. You can probably find it online. And then tell me again that those ornate vestments are all about the minister wanting to draw attention to himself. Bishop Martin might also want to take a look at what Pope Leo is wearing. Guess who wears ornate vestments for Mass? Are you, Bishop Martin, impugning the motives of our Holy Father by your dismissive attitude towards traditional vestments? Are you insulting him and claiming that he cares only about himself and focus on himself? Quite frankly, I wonder if Bishop Martin is projecting. Anyway, some people are unhappy that the Pope has so far remained silent about Bishop Martin, saying, oh, his silence speaks volumes. Why hasn't he said anything? Why hasn't he done anything? This controversy is at most a couple weeks in the making. And if you know how Rome works, Rome is notoriously slow. Rome is notoriously slow on a lot of matters. They can take years to deliberate on things. And also, their first course of action is almost always behind the scenes, privately, because that's sort of the charitable way to do it, right? I mean, Scripture even says if you see a brother sinning, go privately to him. And so that's the way that the Vatican usually chooses to respond, is they try to resolve things privately behind the scenes. So I am certain, one, that Pope Leo is very aware of what's going on in the Charlotte Diocese because people have appealed to him. They have appealed to Rome. But I am also certain that he is taking steps behind the scenes. We don't know what those steps are. We don't know if, when they'll be made public. We're not entirely sure. But I do not think he's just sitting back, saying and doing nothing at all. But slightly switching topics, back to Pride Month. Some hopeful news. Target. Remember how heavily Target used to promote Pride? They promoted Pride gear and Pride merchandise for kids. All of that, and I actually boycotted Target for many years because of this. But now it is apparently pivoting away from promoting Pride and back to promoting more traditional values. There are a lot of people out there saying that they're going to their local Target stores and they're not seeing Pride merchandise anywhere. Take a look at this tweet. This woman, Caitlin Francis, she posted a picture. My Southern California Target, June 1st, 2024 versus Target, June 5th, 2025. Quite a remarkable difference. This is what I want you to do. Please go to your local Target store and see if you spot any Pride gear. You don't have to buy anything there. If you're boycotting it, you don't have to buy anything. Just go and see. Walk around and see, do you see any Pride gear anywhere? And please let me know in the comments beneath this video what you find out, because I would be interested to see just how many Target stores across the nation are discontinuing or downplaying Pride. If you go to the website target.com, you actually do not see Pride at the top of the page as you used to see in prior years. In fact, you're seeing, last time I checked, a father and son wearing a USA sweater with American flag. I mean, that's pretty traditional. That's pretty conservative. You have to actually scroll pretty far down the page to see any mention of Pride at all. And it's actually pretty understated. So if you see no Pride merchandise in your local Target, leave a comment underneath this video. And I also encourage you, email or write the manager of your local Target store saying, thank you. Thank you, because you are not promoting Pride. I will shop here again, or I will encourage other people to shop here again. Let them know that. They need to hear from you. Because these people care about business. They care about making money. And if they know that I'm going to lose money the more I push this LGBT garbage, then they're going to be less likely to push it. So make your voices heard. Do it in a respectful way, but let them know. Meanwhile, Sesame Street, on the other hand, is pushing LGBT propaganda to children as young as 2. Check out their tweet from June 1st. On our street, everyone is welcome. Together, let's build a world where every person and family feels loved and respected for who they are. Happy Pride Month. Then, of course, you see the hands in rainbow colors reaching out, touching. And then here's Sesame Street featuring openly gay public figure Jonathan Van Ness promoting a fashion show.
It's time to finally unveil Alan's monster makeover!
Wow, it's uncanny! Ellen looked just like Jonathan Van Ness.
Cookie Monster, Cookie. That is Jonathan Van Ness.
Elmo, Cookie, are you ready to see my monster piece?
Ready, Jonathan!
Mama Bear, some runway music, please.
Oh, yeah.
People and monsters alike, a round of applause for the Not Too Late Show's newest monster, Alan. Ta-da!
Whoa!
Alan Monster is wearing the latest in high monster fashion with a set of sleek horns, fluffy, fuzzy fur, all topped off with a monster honker.
Yes, Alan!
But in spite of that, there is some good news. A recent Gallup poll shows Republican support for gay marriage has dropped 14 points in the last 3 years. 14 points. That's pretty significant. And why do you think that support has dropped? Some people think it's because of social media, because our news is no longer filtered through legacy media like ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, et cetera, which is, as we know, outrageously biased, and much of it's just propaganda, leftist propaganda. But now, most of us get our news directly from social media, whether it's X or Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. That's where we're getting our news, and it's unfiltered. So we're all seeing these viral videos of, for instance, repulsive drag queen story hours marketed to little children, or the half-nude drag shows in front of little kids, and all this other filth. And we're sick of it. Why did America vote overwhelmingly for President Trump. Partly because we are all sick of this woke LGBT crap that's constantly being shoved in our faces. I've mentioned this before. In his very first speech as president on the day of his election, standing in the Capitol Rotunda, Trump declared that moving forward, the government would only recognize two genders, male and female. The whole room erupted in applause and cheers.
Policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
But those cheers were loudest among Generation Z. Gen Z, the youth, they cheered the loudest. Why? Because they're the ones who had to grow up with this shoved in their faces nonstop, at school, on campus, everywhere. And they are sick of it. All of us are sick to death of it. And we want an end to the insanity and a return to normalcy. The American people made that clear. And businesses, some businesses anyway, not all of them, like Sesame Street and PBS and NPR, which, there's a push to defund them. And I hope that they do defund them. But some businesses are catching on and they're realizing this is losing us money. Again, I've reported this on Catholic News Roundup, but there are a number of companies now that are distancing themselves from Pride Month and realizing, you know what? The American people, they gave a mandate to Trump and they made clear, we don't want this woke stuff anymore. And plus, it's losing us money. Why should we appeal to a tiny minority in the country that may be very vocal, but they're still a tiny minority, when the vast majority of Americans are not interested in this? And in fact, they're turned off by it and it's hurting our business. So you'll see more and more companies just distancing themselves from that. And that is a hopeful sign. So there are signs of hope in this pontificate, signs of hope in this country, and other countries as well, because Poland just elected a pro-life Catholic who actually is a former weightlifter, by the way, but they just elected him as president. So, signs of hope. Keep praying, my friends. Keep praying. Pray for our church, because as the church goes, so goes the world. Please pray for Pope Leo. Whatever you may think of him, he needs our prayers. It's our duty to pray. So please pray for him. Pray for all the cardinals and bishops of the church, all the clergy, and all the laity. One of the messages that Pope Leo set forth in his homily June 1st as well as June 2nd was the importance of marriage and the family. A lot of us as Catholics, we spend time complaining about the bad state of the church hierarchy, the bad state of the clergy, how unfaithful clergy are. We spend a lot of time, spill a lot of ink, criticizing and condemning the clergy. But those clergy came from somewhere. Those clergy were once little children in families that modeled the faith or not, in families where their parents set an example to them of the faith or not. And they absorbed that environment, whatever that family environment was. If you've modeled the faith, okay, it's going to be much more likely that you're going to raise sons who go on to be faithful, devoted, Orthodox clergy. But if you didn't model the faith, and it was a broken home, and there was infidelity and disobedience and disorder and chaos in the home, then you are much more likely to produce clergymen who are unfaithful, who sow chaos and confusion, and who are disobedient to the magisterium. So we need to ensure our own families are modeling truly the love and obedience, the courage, the sacrifice, the patience, the humility, and the meekness and self-control of Christ. Remember all this. In this month of the Sacred Heart, do honor to our Lord by loving him, not just in the sacraments, but in your daily life, how you model Christ in your heart and in your life. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And in the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward, boldly.